Cars Keys is brought to you by TixBlitz.com. TixBlitz.com. No service fees. The price you see is the price you pay, plus shipping. TixBlitz.com. Every ticket, every venue, everywhere.
Hey, what's going on, Bears fans? It's Cars here. Time for this week's Cars Keys to the Game against the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm taking a lot more pleasure in this one this week. Some of you may know I'm not usually the most antagonistic type of person on Twitter, but I really was upset this offseason when so many pundits were riding the 49er wave and saying that they're going to be the team of surprise and putting them in the playoffs. And it was all because of Jimmy Garoppolo and the performance at the end of the year. And I think that performance was very much overvalued, I guess, just because of the timing and the teams that it took place against. And it's not to take away that they had a big game against the Jaguars, but that it was a team that on paper didn't look very solid, didn't look very big. They were really relying, even on paper, heavily on Jimmy Garoppolo and to a lesser extent on Jerick McKinnon to really make this thing go. And they were expecting a bigger leap from their young defensive guys, right? They've got, 3 defensive linemen that have been taken in the top 15 in consecutive drafts. So they were expecting all these things, and it just didn't seem realistic. It didn't seem right, and they were 1-2 before Jimmy went out, and now they sit here at 4-10, mostly because of the the CJ Beathard era. And they've righted the ship somewhat with Nick Mullins, although some of that more has been who they have been playing more than how they have been playing, right? They got very healthy against a really bad Oakland Raiders team that can't sack the quarterback. For some unknown reason, I thought they used to have a pretty decent pass rush, and that seems to be gone. I can't figure out what would have changed from last year to this year for them. So it's a game I'm looking forward to, but what I want to start with is a talk a little bit about one of my favorite things, and that's stats. And if you heard me talk earlier, what I say about stats is stats without context are meaningless, and that's what always gets stat guys in trouble. They kind of throw out meaningless numbers like completion percentage of Kirk Cousins and then not really looking at how short of a passing game that Kirk Cousins is using to get to that number, right? And so all of a sudden this 70+% completion percentage looks like absolute garbage. So what I've noticed in recent weeks is a lot of Bears fans talking about point differential, and that is candidly one of my least favorite statistics in the NFL. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit why it's so meaningless. But there's other reasons for this that I think are extremely positive, and so I want to walk you through all of that. And then I promise that I'm going to tie that back into the Bears game for my keys. So what everyone likes to point out is that the Bears have a 119-point differential in the positive, which ties them for second with the Kansas City Chiefs, behind the New Orleans Saints, who have a 167-point differential. So if you look at it, right, it's a fantastic number. It means that when in Bears victories, they're outscored their opponents by a total of 133 points, which is actually better than the Kansas City Chiefs, who in victories have only outscored their opponents by 126. In losses, right, the Bears have lost by a combined 14 points in 4 games, right? So basically a field goal a game, which holds true for everything except for the New England Patriots game, which was the only one where they lost by a touchdown. Everything else was 3-3-1. So the New Orleans Saints have lost their 2 games by a total of 11 points. The Kansas City Chiefs have lost their games by a total of 7. The reason that I say that this is kind of a misleading stat is the NFL is becoming less and less of a blowout league, right? A 2-score or kind of the number I look at more so a 10-point or more victory just doesn't happen as frequently. It's extremely tough, right? There's a reason, and this is the reason why teams like the Denver Broncos at +7, or even the Green Bay Packers at +1, have positive point differentials with losing records. The league is extremely close. And so you look more at 10-point plus victories, right? The more 10-point victories you have, kind of the greater recipe for success, in my opinion, that your team has. And so, you look at New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints have eight games where they won by 12 points or more, or 10 points or more, which is greater than 75% of their victories. All right, so when they win, they tend to win pretty dominantly. The Kansas City Chiefs, of their victories, 6 of those have been over 10 points. That's, again, about 50% of their team victories, although I'd like to asterisk that one pretty heavily. They haven't had a 10-point win since Kareem Hunt has been suspended. The Bears have 4. And it's important to note that of that 133-point differential, 70 of those points came in 2 games. That's against the Buffalo Bills, and that's against the Tampa Bay Bucks. So that means over the remaining 8 victories, the Bears have won by a total of 49 points. It's not the best of number. It's not a bad number, right? This means that they've won more close games. They've figured out ways to win, right? The fact that they have lost only by a total of 14 points means they've never been blown out. They've played very close in total. They played just as close as Kansas City and as New Orleans, but 119 is just not the stat that you want to go with. So it means, right, in the other 8 wins, the Bears have a total of 63 points. So they win on average by 8. If you look at Kansas City, right, they win by 12 on average. If you look at New Orleans, they win by like 15 on average. That's a better overall number, is to look at, just take out some of these big games, look at what it is, and you'll just see the good news is, right, the difference between the teams that make runs at the end versus the teams that just kind of filter out is that teams who find a way to win, if there are any Sox fans out there, the old Hawk Harrison, the will to win, right, that way overhyped phrase, the Bears have a very strong will to win. So don't look at the point differential, but do look at the fact that they play a lot of close games. And they win way more than they lose, and that really carries over into the playoffs. So the reason I want to talk about that is because as we start to move closer and closer to the playoffs, and it looks less likely that the Bears are going to get a bye, considering, right, the Rams end up playing the Arizona Cardinals this week. That just doesn't look too promising for the Cardinals, who have had completely the wheels fall off, and their head coach looks to be fired soon. But this is a game where I want to see momentum. It's going to be extremely important for this Bears offense to keep their foot on the gas and to figure out a way to continue to score points in bunches. We've kind of gone on a bit of a lull here. We didn't look too good against the LA Rams. We scored 24 points against the Packers. I feel like that game should have been much higher, about 31 to 38 points. The Giants game, I feel like that should have been over 30 points had Chase Daniels made some more throws. I think, the Detroit Lions game, again, that should have been much higher. I think it would have been had that not even been a Thursday night game, or if Mitch had played. But I want to see us as an offense continue to put the foot to the ground, and I want to see them drive, right? We've had a lot of games, we've put up pretty impressively a lot of games over 300 yards and a lot of games over 400 yards. And the last time we really did that in a stretch, that was against Tampa, against Miami, and against New England, when we went for like 480, 470, and 450. We haven't put up 400 yards as an offense since Detroit, and that's a little unfortunate because we faced a New York Giants team that isn't very good, an LA Rams team that's given up a tremendous amount of yardage, a Green Bay team that just simply looked defeated. And so I think it's going to be extremely important for us to really build offensive momentum. I think Mitch played a very solid game last week, but these things need to accelerate, right? These next 2 games are nothing but warm-ups, and we've got to figure out consistent play calling, consistent execution to go. So I call out point differential because this is a game that we should win by 10 points or more. I really think this is a game that we should win by 20 points or more. And so some of the keys I'm going to go talk about kind of tie back into that, and I'm going to start with that San Francisco 49ers defense. And the winning trade that they made with the Chicago Bears, where the Bears drafted Mitch Trubisky, the San Francisco 49ers drafted number 3 overall Solomon Thomas. With their second-round pick, they picked Ahkello Witherspoon. Both of these guys have no business on the field right now. Solomon Thomas has all of 1 sack. Ahkello Witherspoon is basically doesn't even have a jersey number anymore. He just has cleat marks all over his back. Some of that is the unfortunate portion of playing the opposite side of Richard Sherman, who has been much better than I thought he would be after age and injury. He's been a tremendous signing for them. But this is a team that doesn't create turnovers. They haven't created a turnover since week 8, and that was against the Arizona Cardinals. I'll say that again. They have not forced a turnover since week 8. On the season, they have 2 interceptions. That last one against Josh Rosen, week 8. But they've given up 30 touchdowns on average through the air. That is 2 touchdowns a game. And that should be the point of the way that we go about and win this one. This is a team that on average on defense gives up 5.4 yards per play. They've been very bad at giving up some big plays, and I think that's something that we need to exploit. I think they've been very fortunate that Fred Warner has really outplayed I won't even mention his name, but the domestic abuser that used to play at the inside linebacker. They're very fortunate they picked him up in this draft because he's helped that run defense not be as bad, but this is holes everywhere. Outside of Buckner, who one could argue probably got looked over this year for the Pro Bowl, although he's kind of running into the Akeem Hicks issue of you play for a really bad team, so you're just not going to get noticed for that. But, he even hasn't been the most consistent of individuals this year, and that makes it very difficult. If you look at his overall, everybody likes to look at sacks overall from that perspective, but where he's gotten sacks has been against pretty bad teams, right? He started off the year 2.5 against Minnesota. He's gotten 4 against Seattle, and I know Seattle's looked better when they're running the ball, but they're a team that's given up a tremendous amount of hits and pressures on poor Russell Wilson. So 6.5 of his 11 sacks have come against really bad teams. When you look at teams like when he faced the Chiefs, there was nothing. When he went against the Rams and their stout offensive line, nothing. 2 games against the Arizona Cardinals, who don't have much of a line, nothing. He went against the Denver Broncos, which have struggled a lot with pass protection, nothing. So he's definitely the focal point. He's an extremely, and I'm not trying to take away from his talent overall and how good of a player he is, but to me, he's a step behind Hicks, and he's the only thing that you've got to worry about. So that's what I mean. We really need to do this. This is a team that you can run the ball on. This is a team that it gives up 4.2 a carry. This is a team that in 14 games has given up almost 1,600 yards rushing. They've given up 11 big plays, right? 20-yard or more rushes. They've given up 11 TDs on the ground, right? 112 a game. They don't force fumbles. It's just a team that you can play mistake-free against, and this is a team that you can actually go ahead and target. Offense is where, the 49ers offense is where it gets a little trickier. I think the Jerick McKinnon injury in some ways was a blessing in disguise for them, because they've been able to find a really good running back in Matt Breida, who's been injured, and you don't know fully what you're going to get out of him. But this is a guy averaging 5 yards a carry. So even with C.J. Beathard, even with Nick Mullins, the 49ers offense has been pretty big play. So they've been on average 5.7 yards per play. They're rushing for over 4.5 per, right? They're averaging as a team, I think it's like 13 yards a reception, right? This is a team that when they connect, they make big plays. But most of these big plays are yards after the catch, and it's something that's just the trend in the NFL, and I feel like I'm cheating because I say this each and every week, right? That it's all about the big play, all about the big play. That's what it's been, So under Garoppolo, they were about 200 yards a game passing. Under Beathard, it dropped to 180. With Nick Mullins, they're throwing 275 a game. Now, some of that is injury, some of that is some other factors. The offensive line has played slightly better, and I think the threat of a run has helped them out there. But this is a team that really relies on scheming George Kittle open. If you want to talk about differential, George Kittle is their leading receiver at 1,150-some yards. Their next leading guy has played 11 games, and that's Dante Pettis, their second round pick, and he's got 446. So right now that offense starts and ends with Breida and George Kittle. And I know Phil was a big fan of Kittle and is quite upset, and rightfully so, that we pass on him, and so did the rest of the league. But he has been nothing short of phenomenal. He is their big play guy, so they use Pettis a lot on deep threats. You'll see that he's averaging nearly 19 a catch. And Kittle's is averaging 16 a catch, right? For a tight end, that's a phenomenal number. He's had over 16 big plays, right, from a tight end. So that means 16 plus 20-yard receptions. That's a phenomenal statistic. And we saw last week in the game 2 weeks ago against Denver, when he had about 200 yards at half. They've really been good at scheming him open. So that needs to be your focus. But you can't lose sight of Dante Pettis. Now, I think longer term, you're going to see Anthony Miller is definitely going to be a much better receiver, but what they're trying to utilize Pettis for is this deep threat, someone to kind of keep safeties from shading over to cover Kittle. They're using Pettis to try to go ahead and get deep, so our corner's going to have to play very physical. But this is another one of those games where you have to stop these short passes, right? On average, Mullins is throwing the ball 2 yards short of the sticks, right? So this is, again, get a player in space and get them making some stuff yards after the catch. And so people talk a lot about that chess match between Shanahan. And Shanahan has been, outside of his Super Bowl year, I would say this is probably one of his best, if not his best ever, play calling, because they don't have the weapons, right? To win even 4 games when you've got, 2 guys over 30 catches from your wide receivers, and one of them is a guy by the name of Kendrick Bourne. That's tremendous, right? You basically have, just like I've mentioned earlier, you just have 2 playmakers on offense. You've got a shoddy offensive line that, McGlinchey has been really solid at tackle, and Staley has been another stalwart year. Internally, you can just destroy them. I remember watching that first Vikings game, and there's just no time. There's never any time. And so what he's done to keep this team moving the ball, to keep them staying positive, right, scoring points, even with the amount of struggles that they've had, that's incredible. So you have to be aggressive and switching off, because there's going to be a lot of rub routes. There's going to be a lot of pick plays. And those are things that you're going to have to continue to monitor, right? So that to me is the key. Is it's not shutting down George Kittle, but it's definitely realizing that he's their sole threat in the passing game. You have to shadow him, and you can't let Dante Pettis beat you deep. This is a team that gives up a lot of sacks. So on the year, they've been sacked 44 times. Most of those came in under the first two guys. They've been much better. So they were at about 4 sacks a game under when Garoppolo was there. They were about 3 sacks a game. When Beathard was there, they're about 2 sacks a game with Mullins. And Mullins has definitely more escapability, where Garoppolo is much more of a pocket guy. But you're going to have to create pressure, and you're going to have to do this internally. I mean, while the players aren't the same, you have to treat their offense much like you did the Green Bay Packers. That's the way that they're going to attack. That's the way that you're going to have to defend. So, again, let's hope that the defense stays interested, right? We get the games we lost, we shouldn't have lost. Some of that was disinterest. Some of that was rust. This is a game where both teams have to start building that momentum. I think that started in LA against LA, that carried over against Green Bay. These next 2 games, it's been going to be of an extreme importance to go ahead and really build on that momentum. This needs to end in a 4-game winning streak. This needs to end in an offensive team that is starting to really put its foot on the accelerator, stop making stupid penalties, to stop shooting themselves in the foot, but to continually play by play build on momentum, to add wrinkles, to really show something. You know, my little tidbit here is if you look at the Chicago Bears lately, you know, I was one of the many that was extremely happy that Anthony Miller was traded up for in the 2nd round. I feel like he was such a talented guy in Memphis that I was really hopeful for the way that was going to be. But since what I would call his breakout game against Detroit, where he the first game where he had 122 yards on 5 catches, he's had 6 catches since, including 0 catches the last 2 games against the Rams and the Packers. He's had 1 target in the last 2 games. And, you know, some of that is why we've seen him drop back to return kicks, because he's a playmaker. But Anthony Miller has all but disappeared in this offense. And I think, you know, realistically, if you look at it a little more, I would even argue that for the most part, Taylor Gabriel has done a bit of a disappearing act as well. We've seen a lot of consistent targets from him. But he's catching 3 balls a game on average. These are really short passes. So, right, he was under 10 yards of reception against the New York Giants, against the LA Rams. He was back over 10 against Green Bay. But those 2 guys need to start seeing. We need to start seeing more out of them. And this is the time, right, where their slight size and nature and the games are getting colder. That may be a little bit more difficult. But if this is a team that's going to go out and win by 14 points, like I think they should, those are 2 guys who are going to need to show back up on the scoreboard. So that's it for me for this week. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at CarsKeys1 and continue to interact with me there at all points in time. Otherwise, let's bear down, and Merry Christmas to everybody. Thanks.